countries in this neck of the woods were much more involved in the Syrian civil war than my country was.
Well, you're also
so do you want to take some responsibility for that? Do you want to take more refugees here in Qatar? Do you want to take more in the Gulf?
No one is immune to any sort of criticism. But we're talking about the Western countries, the British countries, the British countries.
What did Britain do in Syria?
We're talking about these governments that you seem to suggest should be immune.
No, when did I suggest that?
By far, on the top of my list, the greatest speaker in the world today is Douglas Murray. There's no question about it. Here he is at a great panel discussion in Doha, talking about the rights of refugees and immigrants to move to the Western world. Let's listen to what he has to say about it. And of course, don't forget to leave your comments below, subscribe to this great channel, and we'll talk to you on the other end of the video.
The developing world cannot move to the developed world. You seem to conveniently forget that the developed world moved to the developing world without asking permission.
No, I don't.
It seems to me as well that this is a particularly Western-centric viewpoint, and a misleading one at that, because you know as well as I do, and the figures show it, 85% of the world's refugees, in fact, settle in neighboring countries in the Middle East, in Africa, and Asia. They do not rush over to Europe.
Sure. You'd make a big mistake if you think I hadn't heard of colonialism.
You don't seem to address it in any
I'd
way.
also suggest, by the way, that I don't know how long we're going to go on about colonialism for. I'm happy to do it as long as you like, but let me just.
Don't we have to be factful, though? Don't we have to be?
But also, don't think, if I may say so,
history.
that colonialism was just a Western thing. What was one of the largest and most significant empires in history, but the Ottoman Empire? Do we say that Turkey has to do something like the West to deal with
That's
Islam?
not the issue.
You brought up colonialism.
You are talking about the Western view that they should stay where they belong.
I'm saying that it seems to me to be much wiser that if you have a very large humanitarian crisis in, for instance, Syria, you try to make sure that people remain in the area. This isn't say all of them, but it is more likely. I absolutely agree they do. I've seen it firsthand.
Look at Turkey, 3.5 million refugees. Look at Lebanon and Jordan per capita.
What
the
I'm
countries that have
suggesting
the
to you
most.
is,
in fact, in Lebanon, you've got 1 in every 4 person living in that country is a Syrian refugee.
Absolutely.
So to suggest they're not doing very much is just being misleading, being dishonest.
Believe me, I'm not being misleading. And I said from the outset that I agree with the point that most refugees remain in the area. And I said that I think that that's a good idea. I'm suggesting to you that I think it's better that people, for instance, fleeing Syria, end up in the countries around Syria in order to be able to return to their country than putting them in
but
Norway.
But they will return. You are suggesting that they don't want to return. Who, in their right
I'm not
mind,
suggesting
if they
they
had
don't
the
want to
option,
return. When did I say
and we will
that?
hear from a refugee, if they had the option to return, of course they'd want to return.
I didn't say they wouldn't.
They leave everything behind. But you seem to also be oblivious to another important fact that I just want to throw at you before we go to a video clip that I want to show you. It's, what about the moral responsibility, though, of Western countries that have contributed to the destabilization of the region, the meddling, the military interventions, not to mention the arms sales that continue as we speak? What about
Do you want me to answer that? Okay, I'll answer that one frankly. Nobody denies, for instance, the disaster of Iraq. But who are the people who intervened most in Syria?
Isn't just Iraq.
Hang on. Let me answer it. Who intervened most in Syria? It wasn't America. It wasn't Britain. It's Iran, Russia. It's, among others, countries, including the one we're in and others around the Gulf here.
Before we got to Syria, we had Iraq, we had Libya, we had many
countries in this neck of the woods were much more involved in the Syrian civil war than my country was.
Well, you're also
so do you want to take some responsibility for that? Do you want to take more refugees here in Qatar? Do you want to take more in the Gulf?
No one is immune to any sort of criticism. But we're talking about
I'm glad to hear
the Western countries, the British countries, the British countries.
What did Britain do in Syria?
We're talking about these governments that you seem to suggest should be immune.
No, when did I suggest that?
Absolved of any responsibility.
When did I suggest that?
I want to get to the other point that you make, and it's an important one, Douglas Murray. You suggest that we need to actually balance between two very important virtues, two important concepts of mercy toward the refugee and justice toward your own citizens. Let's take a quick look at this instance involving refugees.
Do you send anyone for us? We are the Syrians. About 300.
Sir, I give you the number of Malta authority because you are near Malta.
Hello.
Yes.
About 100 children and 100 women and maybe 100 men. Please hurry. Water is coming into it. The boat is going down. We are dying. 300 persons.
You have called Malta. You have called Malta.
Don't throw us. Captain, run away.
Call Malta. Call Malta.
I have no enough account on the mobile. It will cut. Please. You have my number now. You call me, please.
That was twice as close to an Italian island as it was to Malta. But again, This idea that, we have to safeguard our values, where does mercy fit in that? Not just mercy, but the obligation, the legal obligations of states towards refugees.
I'd suggest that we all make sure we don't shift responsibility. There is a responsibility to everyone. That would include the state we're standing in now, wouldn't it? It would include all the states in this region. It would include the brother states. It would include the Ummah. It would include everybody. It wouldn't just be the Italians. Now, the Italians, by the way, and let me just finish this point.
That's a valid issue, but let me respond to it, because you mentioned the states of the region. It's a valid issue, but unlike the European countries, allow me to just make this point, unlike the European countries,
I'll respond to 2 points.
They are not parties to the 1951 Refugee Convention. So the legal obligations are, well, it's just a fact.
Conveniently, isn't it?
But I'll let you carry on.
But this means that countries that are signatories to the Refugee Convention get more blame and more assumption that they are going to have to hold more of the burden than countries that didn't. And I'm suggesting to you that nobody should be able to absolve themselves from blame. But if you go to Italy now, and I don't know when you were last there, but it is not the case that this is going well in Italy, either for the migrants who are arriving or for the Italian population.
Isn't it because the resources are not being poured into this? Let's face it, the policies are not there, the resources aren't there.
I see these people when they arrive, I follow their stories. It is not the case just that they don't, the local populations in Italy I've been to Lampedusa, I've seen the boats coming in. The local populations are extremely generous. They are extremely kind to the people. Most of the populations in Europe, let's just not have this idea that Europeans are somehow incredibly cold-hearted. Countries in Europe have taken in a lot of people, and they are trying to deal with a very big problem very swiftly.
Question, please.
Hi, I'm Hamad Abu Hawash. I'm a senior at Georgetown University. And my question is to Mr. Douglas Murray. And before I ask my question, I just want to say, you said no sound bites, but then you said the developing world cannot move to the developed world. I don't know what that's about.
I think I said it before.
My question is, since you brought up migration from the developing world, I'd like to ask you this. Every year, the developed world sends about $300 billion of aid to the developing world, but the developing world sends back trillions in debt repayments to the developed world. Now, don't you think that this is the main reason why migrants are moving to Europe? Because money is moving out of the developing world. Wealth is leaving the developing world and moving to the developed world, to build on what Lamont Hill said. Don't you think this is why people are moving to the Western world, to the developed world?
Well, no, I don't. Again, I repeat the fact there are no simple answers. And if it was simply the fact that you could, do a debt default or something and solve the whole migration issue, then that would be great. But it just isn't the case. You think that if for instance, all African countries were allowed to default on debt, that they'd become burgeoning, flourishing societies? You think that the problem across, for instance, sub-Saharan Africa isn't just unbelievable greed and theft by politician after politician? You think that if you just wrote off the debt, that would stop being an issue and everyone would become transparent and clean in their dealings with money? I mean, the problems are much deeper than this. They're much deeper than just a simple solution like that. As, if I may just add quickly to the previous two comments, the late, very distinguished American diplomat Daniel Patrick Moynihan had a wonderful rule he came up with, known as Moynihan's Law, where he said that human rights, claims of human rights violations often happen in exactly inverse proportion to human rights violations. That is, you hear about them in the countries that are most free. And before long, you can end up with the presumption that the most free countries are the ones who are most abusive of human rights. And this happens with the case when we talk about our leaders and the ones, it's all very well. We can talk about the Trump administration, we can talk about the democracies and so on for all we like. We can all make criticisms and we all should. But, okay, briefly, Mr. Putin, what are you going to do about him? What are you going to do about the mullahs in Iran? What are you going to do about the House of Saud in Saudi Arabia? You see, what we end up with is this situation. We go, oh, Mr. Trump. We can all do that. Believe me, I can riff on Trump all day. But again, you're being quite selective, aren't you? What are you going to do about the people you can't do anything about? Are you going to ignore them? Are you going to give them a pass? Or are you just going to enjoy beating up on the democracy?
I hate to have to interrupt you.
So I'm going to talk briefly about, my mother's experience as an immigrant, and I want to touch on something that Mark Lamont Hill said, this power of education and telling people how refugees fit into the wider context of economic development. Here's why I'm very skeptical about that. Because when my mother arrived in the UK and her parents arrived in the UK, people still called them dirty packies. When she had graduated from Oxford University, she was still a brown person who was not seen as a citizen, right? So to what extent can we really sell this idea that being educated or fitting X, Y, and Z criteria is what you need to do as a refugee for people to humanize you. The inherent problem with these people is that they don't humanize you. You can't fulfill your oppressor's criteria so that they see you as human. So how do you humanize people?
Dehumanizing refugees, thank you very much. And with this, let me go to you, Douglas Murray. Because much of your argument, Douglas, seems to be about the us versus them, the fact that, we have our own values, our own Britishness, our own virtues, and they will come to our shores with their values, their traditions. You seem to almost suggest that they come to your countries with a lesser breed of values.
No, I don't think I said that at any point, and that's another time you've tried to put something in my mouth.
So when you talk about the difference in values, what do you suggest?
Look, first of all, I didn't say that. I said that there are challenges because we do know that there are challenges, and let's just be frank about this. I mean, for instance, I've been in the Gulf for the last week or so. I see more burqas in my home city of London than I have seen in the Gulf in recent days, certainly here in Doha. Now, I can't say I'm delighted by the sight of more and more burqas in London. Do I feel any hatred of the people who wear them? Of course not. Of course not. But I can't say I'm elated by it. And definitely there are times I think, what percentage of burqas in this area becomes like not that pleasant for everyone else?
But again, is it all down to burqas? Because again, you're not asking people with other traditions whether they care about the sight of people drinking alcohol or showing up in bikinis. Again, it's a very
we could in Britain
Western-centric viewpoint.
I'm not. I have to say, you're going to bark up the wrong tree if you think you're going to persuade a Brit that we should stop drinking alcohol because of people arriving in our country. I mean, that's not going to happen. These things are all a bit of give and take.
You bring your own traditions that don't quite fit with theirs.
Well,
they don't.
Yeah, there are, as I said, and before we got all confrontational, which you did from the get-go, I said what the problem is here is that these things are all rubbing against each other. And in that situation, you have to work out what things you're willing to give up, which things you're willing to compromise on, and which ones you're not. You're not going to persuade the Brits to massively change their culture, but let me just make the point. Every single society has certain aspects of it doesn't want to give up. This one will. In Qatar, this one will. Everyone does. So please don't try to make this a kind of bigoted European thing. That would be a very, very dishonest way to. That would be a very dishonest way to represent this debate.
Well, there he is, ladies and gentlemen, with one hand tied behind his back, the great Douglas Murray, the author. I have several of his books behind me. I had the privilege of interviewing him last year about his new book on democracies and death cults, talking about the Hamas war against the Jewish people in the Western world. And boy, what a great personality. I mean, who could take on 5 different speakers at least and a whole audience all poised against him? What a remarkable, fantastic, well-researched, intelligent individual and a great debater, Douglas Murray. I mean, he's able to just kind of flip the arguments, and all the Islamists and all the leftists, they have to blame America, they have to blame Western Europe. But I think Douglas Murray makes one salient and very powerful point. What about the responsibility in the Arab world? What about some of the richest countries in the world? What about Saudi Arabia, Qatar, or called Qatar in the United States? What about all the wealthy Gulf states? What about Iran? What about the former Soviet Union? What about India? What about the Chinese? Where is the blame on against the despots of the world, against the non-democracies, against the oil-rich Arabs? Where's the demand in the West? Do you see people demanding from Saudi Arabia to pay for refugees? Are they allowed to, or do they even allow for refugees to enter their countries? No, because many of their people they allow in are just slaves from Africa and other countries, and so to speak, what they would call lower Arab states, to just serve them in the Saudi Arabian Empire. And the exact same in Qatar. They bring in slaves from around the world. They capture them. They pay them nothing. They work for these people because they're oil magnates, the super rich, the super wealthy. But one thing they've happened to escape, especially Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Iran, what about the responsibility for the mess they've created? What about the responsibility to absorb, with all their literally trillions and trillions of dollars of oil and power and real estate investments around the world? What about their responsibility for the migrants? Why does it always have to come on to Western countries? And we saw what happened over the last 10, 15 years. We saw the Islamization of Western Europe, streets in London which are unrecognizable, no-go zones in Paris. Same is true in Spain. And at the same time, we see this tremendous rise in tremendous anti-Semitism and rape as well. Two factors go up, anti-Semitism and rape. This has to do with Islamic fundamentalism, Islamic societies, not Judeo-Christian societies. Much lower anti-Semitism, 7 to 8%. Islamic countries, 60, 70, 80, 90% anti-Semitism. The distinction, the statistics are tremendous, remarkable, and extremely clear. But of course, these panelists are just boo-hooing, more grievance, the same nonsense we see from Democrats that are destroying this country in the United States right now, the same grievance politics we hear from these people, her experience and his experience as immigrants. Well, where are these people running to that they hate so much? If they hate it so much, go back. They're running to the United States. They're running to Canada, England, and France, and all they do is complain how it's not enough. It's not good enough. What about being thankful for the society built upon Judeo-Christian values and civilization that has created this wealth, the freedom? Who created this freedom in the West that all these third world countries are running to? America and Canada and the British. They created the greatest freedom for the most people in human history, ladies and gentlemen. And so these people want to complain how bad America is, how bad Western Europe is. And what's great about Douglas Murray, he just turns around and says, wait a second, what about Saudi Arabia? What about Iran? That's just murdered maybe up to 60,000 people. Where's the demonstrations against them? Where's the demand from the West, from the liberals, from the Democratic Party, from the people that flooded the streets after October 7th, screaming from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and globalizing Intifada? Where are all these human rights activists? We can only hear crickets, ladies and gentlemen. We only hear silence on campuses around the United States and the world. Where's all the left demonstrating against human rights? Where are all the LGBTQ plus people demonstrating like they demonstrated against the small, tiny, defenseless Jewish people? Where are they right now? Absolutely silent, because it doesn't meet the narrative. West bad, orange-haired man bad, Douglas Murray bad, Jews are bad. And it's amazing to see Douglas Murray fight up and just say it like it is. He just dispels their arguments and puts the blame on them, inverses all the horrific leftist arguments against, and the Islamic and the Muslim arguments against the Western world, and turns it back in their face. What are you doing about this? Where's your responsibility? Where's your leadership? It's gone. You could hear crickets from Saudi Arabia, crickets from Qatar, crickets from all these despotic countries in the world, because they don't really care. They have an agenda to destroy the Western world. That is their agenda, or at least to move there to use it and then destroy it, like organizations like CARE and the Muslim Brotherhood want to do for so many years in the United States and Canada. But I want to hear what you have to say about this video. I'm sure you have a lot to comment on. So don't forget to leave your comments below. And of course, subscribe to this great channel, and we'll see you in future great videos.